this message today and then the one next Sunday are truly opposites, but yet at the same time, they can be partnered together. I guess it's kind of like a marriage, right? You got two opposites, but yet they're partnered together. Because today we're going to talk about negativity. Fun subject, isn't it? And the next week, Lord willing, we're going to talk about how to have a positive attitude, which I think is one of the most important parts of the Christian life, to be able to have an abundant life, to live a joy-filled life, to be able to have a life that reflects the goodness of the Lord. I think it's very, very important for us to have a positive mindset and a positive attitude. I don't think God wants us to go around critical and negative all the time. In fact, Paul even said to do all things without murmurings and without grumbling. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And we're going to look to the book of Numbers, chapter 11. This is when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. And man, they were a tough bunch to be around, I would suppose, because they did a lot of grumbling. They complained about the food. They complained about Moses and his marriage. They complained about even the promised land. They complained about the promised land. But here in Numbers 11, let's read these first 6 verses, and we'll get an idea of some of the characteristics of these people and the things that they were dealing with. It says, "Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was called Taberah, because fire from the Lord had burned among them. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, 'If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers and the melons and leeks and onions and garlic.'" But the breath must have smelled awful. I just thought about that. "But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." There was a department store that had their answering machine call-in system set up like this. If you're calling to place an order or to make a payment, please press 1. If you're calling to register a complaint, please press 632892276431063 and one way. We don't like to hear complaints, do we? And we certainly don't like being around negative people. And I think sometimes in the church, sometimes in our Christian lives, we kind of, maybe in the back of our minds, look at negativity as one of those minor sins. You know, the kind that God almost just winks at, expects. And we don't take it all that seriously sometimes. I mean, we certainly don't put it up there with drunkenness and adultery and murder and all that kind of stuff. Oh, well, you know, I've been a little negative lately, and we don't think a whole lot about it. But I'll tell you what, if you read these chapters in the book of Numbers, chapters 11, 12, and 13, you'll find that God reacts very strongly to a negative spirit. I mean, here in Numbers 11, it says that he actually burned some of the outskirts of their camp. Later in that same chapter, in verse 33, it says that God sent a severe plague upon the people of Israel because of their complaining spirit. And in chapter 12, the anger of the Lord kindled against them further because of their continual grumbling and griping and complaining. So we may look at it as being, you know, if we were going to categorize sin, which we probably shouldn't do, we would probably look at this as being one of the lesser sins, but not in God's eyes. And I'm going to talk about reasons why that's so today. And through this message and next Sunday, hopefully we can work on, in our own personal lives, myself included, on having a more positive, not just outlook, but attitude as we walk through life. I think this is one of those sins that sometimes creeps into our lives almost imperceptibly. You know, it's just one of those things that it just kind of weaves its way into our lives without us really knowing until suddenly, you know, we realize, boy, something comes up and sparks our mind is, well, I really need to watch my mouth. I've been really critical of people lately. Or man, I've been really negative. What's wrong with me? And something kind of snaps, Maybe there's some kind of conviction, maybe a sermon, maybe something somebody says that you hear, maybe something you read in the scriptures, and you think, boy, I really have been negative lately. I need to watch this. And so sometimes it happens, and maybe today, you might be thinking, boy, I've really been more negative than what I should be. And maybe this will be a little bit of a wake-up call. We'll see. We're going to look at 5 statements I want to make about negativity that we need to look at and then examine our own hearts and say, have I been a negative person? Have I been a hypercritical type of a person? And then, again, next Sunday we'll talk about how to develop a positive attitude. But 5 things I want to say about negativity. All right, number 1, and this is not necessarily encouraging to start out, but negativity is the natural tendency of the human spirit. That's not a good thing. And the reason I want to talk about this is that when we recognize this, it enables us to see, hey, this is something I need to fight against. Because if you just let yourself go down the natural road, you're probably going to become a negative person. Positivity is something you have to develop and focus on, or else you'll become negative. I think about it in terms of a marriage, for example. Now you have a couple, and maybe they make meals, and they get the laundry done. The loose hinges on the cabinets get fixed. They're generous in their affection to one another, and all these things. They have a really good marriage, except maybe she just can't stand the messiness of the bathroom counter, and he just doesn't care. Or maybe he gets a little perturbed because of maybe she infringes on his garage and puts things in there, messes up his tools. And what can happen is one person can start focusing on that negative, and despite all the good qualities in their marriage, one negative can just kind of worm its way into the other person's heart, to where that's what they focus on. And they could have a pretty good marriage otherwise. But maybe there's one trait about your spouse, or one characteristic, or one pattern, and that one negative in your mind can just offset everything else and just drive you nuts. And that's what you focus on. That seems to be the natural tendency, I got an amen, of the human spirit, And that's why we have to overcome it. It seems like we just see the negative. Did you hear about this one guy? He got this new bird dog, and he was bragging to one of his friends. He said, my dog is so great, it can even walk on water. And of course his friend was skeptical. He said, your dog can walk on water. But they're out hunting one day, and the guy shoots a duck. And that dog just darts across the surface of the water, gets that duck, brings it back, drops it at his owner's feet. The dog's paws are hardly even wet. The guy says, bet he can't do it again. So the guy shoots another duck. And again, the dog darts across the water, makes his way back, brings the duck back to the owner. The owner says to his friend, what do you think about that? The friend looks at the dog and he looks at the owner. He says, not much of a swimmer, is he? We just look at the negative. I read an article this week by a woman named Margaret Jaworski. She's a freelance writer. She was talking about in psychology, there's something called negative bias that kind of describes the human condition, that we tend to look at the negative. We even in the weather reports, we talk about the chance of rain. We don't talk about the chance of sunshine. Why is that? We look at the negative. That's why I've always heard all my life that if someone you care about insults you or hurts you or kind of says something that just doesn't sit well with you, it takes 7 compliments to overcome that. 7, because you focus on the negative. You can read, if you were an actor, for example, and you read 20 reviews and 19 of them were flattering and you read one negative, that would probably bother you more than anything else, because we tend toward the negative. And we kind of have that way of looking at things. When we were living in Indiana back in the 90s, in 95, 96, it's a brutal winter. I remember one time it got down to 25 below zero. I think it's the coldest weather I've ever been in. And the winter just wouldn't let go, And then finally, April rolls around. And I remember I was driving in my car and I had the radio on, and this guy on the radio was giving the forecast. And in a couple of days, it was going to be beautiful. It was like at 60, mid-60s. And finally, the winter's letting go. Okay, springtime's going to come. And you know what this guy says? He says it was going to be mid-60s, it's going to be beautiful. And then he says this. You know what that means, though? Pretty soon we're going to have to start mowing our lawns. I just couldn't believe. I just wanted to jump into that radio and just give that guy a piece of my mind. What are you doing ruining the sunshine for me? I don't like 25 below. I don't like 25 above. And here he is just ruining this good news. Why do people do that? You know, it's like we got something good and you're going to just make it bad. Forget about the mowing of the lawn. It's going to be nice. But that's kind of how people are. It's the natural tendency of the human spirit. And so if we're going to become positive, if we're going to stop the negativity in our life, we have to consciously make an effort to focus on the positive. Because if not, you'll grumble every Monday morning. You may grumble every morning. You'll grumble at the slightest thing that upsets your day, your rhythm, anything that gets in your way. If you don't intentionally look for the good and try to change your mindset. Okay, the second statement about negativity is that negativity is like a cancer that will destroy your life. It will. We tend to treat this as a minor thing, but it can destroy you. No one can be happy and joy-filled and enjoy life if they're a negative person. You know, I didn't have to do any research to figure that out. I didn't have to scour the internet for an article from a professional to determine whether or not this was true. I just made that up all by myself. Do you know why? Because I've observed enough of life to know that that's reality. Nobody can be happy if they're negative all the time. Because I've known negative people, and you have too. And you know something? They're not happy. How can you be happy if you're negative all the time? And if I was to come around and talk to every one of you individually this morning and say, do you want to be happy? Do you want to enjoy life? You want to go through life in a positive way? And you'd all say yes. I'm pretty confident that you'd all say yes. Then I'd say to you, don't complain all the time. Don't look at the negative. Don't be a whiner. Look at the good side of life. Because you cannot enjoy life if you're negative all the time. In fact, negativity is one of the most blatant causes for melancholy, gloom, depression, just always looking at the negative side. Also, negativity will destroy your health. Now, that's something I do know from the experts, is that negativity destroys your health. That people who live long lives are generally positive people. Now, you know, some of them may not be. They might get by. They might slip through the cracks. But for the most part, you know, you talk to somebody who's lived to be 90, 100 years old or more, and generally speaking, they'll even say, well, I've always been a positive person and not negative. Negative people, it eats up your insides. It really does. And it'll cause an early death. I've heard people say, I don't want to live to be 100. Well, be a negative, critical person. You might die by the time you're 40. Get your wish. Spare us all that misery. Just kidding. You've heard it said that the complaining people don't live longer. It just seems like they do. You've heard that before. But I'm not kidding. It'll destroy your body. It has a negative effect, not only on your psyche and on your outlook on life, but also on your physical body. And thirdly, number 3, negativity will make those around you miserable as well. It really will. The Bible talks about, as Christians, that we ought to be about improving the lives of other people. Would you agree with that? If not, listen to the scriptures. 1 Corinthians 10:24 says that we should seek the well-being of others. Hebrews 10:25 says that we should exhort one another. That means to encourage one another, lift one another up. Galatians 6:10 says that as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men. And so the Bible continually tells us to exhort one another, to encourage one another, and to build other people up, to make their lives better. That should always be the goal of our lives, to make other people's lives better, more enriching. You can't do that if you're a negative person. At some point in the past, I think I've told you about my grandmother a little bit on a different subject. And I want to tell you a little bit about my grandmother this morning. And to be honest, I'm hesitant to do it because, well, she's my grandmother. But she lived to be 100 years old. She passed away in 2011. And she was a great woman in many respects. I did her funeral. I officiated her funeral and had a lot of good things to say about her. If I was hungry, she'd make me something to eat. She was a seamstress, and so if I needed pants hemmed or taken in, she'd do it, you know. Wish I had her now, because now I can take them out. The years change, you know. And she had a lot of great qualities about her. But here's the story. In 1969, her husband died. I was 5 years old, and she came to live with us. It was my mom's mother. So she would have been 58 at the time, and I was 5 years old. I had two sisters. And she lived with us until I moved away when I was 21. And my grandmother, despite her good qualities, was one of the most negative persons that I've ever known. And quite honestly, she made my growing up years very, very difficult. And it was every day. She would complain about the clothes we wore, me and my sisters. She'd complain about the music we listened to, the shows we watched on television. And if I brought a girl to the house, you know, she'd complain about her. If my sisters brought boys to the house, she'd complain about them. You know, if we went to a football game, of course we had season tickets, you know, and to Marshall, and then sometimes we'd go, she'd say, "Why, there are people going to hell, and you're going to waste your time in a football game," you know, and things like that. I mean, it's like you couldn't enjoy things because she was always harping on something. She wouldn't want you to put anything on the Bible, a newspaper, magazine, or anything, because she said, you know, it was disrespectful, it was blasphemous to, you know, put something on the Bible. And, you know, here it is 40 years later, and, you know, if I see something on the Bible, I think I hear her mouth, I hear her words. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it necessarily, you know, I don't think you're intentionally doing something disrespect, but I see that I hear my grandmother. And it was every day. I remember there was one year when I was like 16 or so that she got her own apartment for a short while. And the atmosphere in our house lifted. It was like a cloud was gone. By that time, my oldest sister had moved away, so it was my mom and dad and me and my sister, Barb, who's closer to age than me. And it was just like a totally different household. It was just unbelievable. And then she moved back in about a year later. And it didn't matter what you did. I mean, you know, my dad and I would always read the newspaper in the morning, you know. And no, I'm not that studious, it was always sports and comics. But, you know, she was a talker, my grandmother, always talking. And she'd be talking, you know, if you exhibited any amount of frustration because you're trying to read the paper or whatever, you know, she would say something, you know, about, you know, I'm not going to be here forever, you know, and you can read the newspaper anytime, and, you know, all this kind of stuff, you know. And it was just like, it was just a burden to live under that constantly. It even irritated my own mother. And of course, my dad would go up to his own room where the TV was to watch TV. So I didn't realize it at the time until I got older. He was doing it to escape my grandmother. Smart man. But I say this, not out of disrespect to my grandmother, because like I said, I have a lot of love for her. But I say that as a cautionary tale. Don't be that person. To understand that the way you treat people, the things you say, has an impact on other people. And I carry this with me. There are things that I carry with me to this day because I lived with that every day of my life growing up. And you don't want to do that to other people. So understand, be a blessing to others. Find something good to say, to encourage them. Not always find something to harp on. I think my grandmother's philosophy was, if I complain about it, they'll do what I want them to do, or they'll do what the right thing is, or whatever. And that's not the way to get people to do the right thing. And besides, her opinions weren't always right anyway. So don't be that. You're going to make everybody around you miserable. And you can affect their lives for years and years to come. Okay, number 4. Negativity is contagious. You can make other people negative with your negativity. So be careful. It's a contagious thing. You can spread. It's like germs, when you sneeze and you make other people sick. Negativity is like sneezing negativity on other people. And it can make up, it's not going to make everybody negative. Fortunately, my grandmother's negativity did not make me negative. But many times it will make others around you negative and help them to find negative things that they would not have seen otherwise. But you pointed it out. Thank you very much. Have you ever had something like this happen? You're talking with somebody about something and they'll say something about another person. They say, they really are standoffish or something like that. And then you find yourself saying, I'd never thought about that. But now that you mention it, yeah, they really are. Now, what's funny is, you never even thought about it before. But now that this other person has brought it up, now you notice it. You see what's happening? Their negativity is having an effect on you. And now you're going to be all negative, you see? And so we have to be careful because our negativity rubs off on everybody else. Now, here's the positive. Here's the good thing about it. A positive attitude is contagious too. It's contagious too. So here's what I want to say to you. You have the power, think about this, you have the power to change the atmosphere of your marriage, of your home, your relationship with your children, maybe even your workplace, maybe your church, Sunday school group, whatever groups and organizations you're a part of. You have the capacity, since it's contagious, to either be positive or negative and affect those around you. So choose to be positive and see how contagious it becomes. Don't feed into other people's negativity. If somebody's being negative all the time, it's kind of like gossip. If you feed into the gossip, it's just going to continue. And so if somebody's negative and you start being negative with them, it's just going to make more negativity. And so just be positive and develop an atmosphere of positivity. And start in your own home. That's probably the best place because our homes need positivity, especially in this culture. Okay, number 5, one more. Negativity is a poor witness for the kingdom of God. Jesus said, let your light so shine before men. He didn't say let your gloom and despair shine before men, because it won't. People look to us as Christians, and think about this. If we're negative all the time, if we're just people of gloom and despair, and we're always criticizing, and we're always harping on the bad and the wrong and everything, and that's all they see, do you think anybody's going to say, boy, I really want to be a part of the church. I really want a piece of that type of philosophy. I want to be a part of that group. Because they're always sad and always miserable all the time. They're always complaining about something. Nobody's going to say, yeah, I want to be with them. No. You see, when people see how we love one another and how we rejoice and we share the love of God, that's what they want to be a part of. And that's why Jesus told us to show love. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, and you have love for one another. And so let our love shine. But when we as Christians allow negativity to overtake our lives, it's a poor witness for the kingdom. I know of a church that relocated, and it was a large church, like 1,000 people, and they had some major parking issues. And part of it was, of course, with the numbers of people, some people were having to park on the back 40, and walk a long way to get to the sanctuary. And some people were parking on the grass. And it created some problems because some people didn't think they should park on the grass because, it tears up the lawn and all this kind of stuff. And when they had 2 services or 3 services, the transition was difficult because you got people coming in and you got people leaving at the same time. And the pastor said that they had to hire some police officers. But not to direct the traffic, but to put an end to the fisticuffs that were taking place among the people in the church parking lot. Okay? And he said that eventually they went, you're going to love this, they went to valet parking, which is pretty cool. You know, you just drive up to the door, you get out just like at a restaurant or something, and you give your key and all that stuff, you get a number, and you just walk right in, they go park your car. He said, you're not going to believe this. He said, but there was one couple that left our church because the valet service wasn't good enough. He said, as if another church is going to have better valet service, you know? Most churches don't even know how to spell valet. And they're complaining because our valet service isn't good enough. And he just got a kick. Well, not a kick. Actually, it's sad if you think about it. But you know, as Christians, why do we let petty things like that get under our skin? And we have to think, what kind of witness is this to the kingdom of God? Let me give you just a couple of things about overcoming negativity. And then next week, we'll really hit on it about developing a positive attitude. But just give you a little snippet here at the end of this message. Because I don't want to just leave you with all those truths about negativity. To overcome negativity, first of all, always be on the lookout for it. Because even if you're a generally positive person, it can still sneak in, like I said earlier. But first, commit it to prayer. Anytime we want to overcome something, we need to give it to the Lord and say, God, I don't want to be negative. Or maybe you're thinking, maybe you're convicted, and you're thinking, boy, I really have been negative. And I ask God to forgive you and help you. So when negativity comes into your thoughts and minds, you just push it aside. But largely, and this may sound oversimplified, but it's the truth. Largely, negativity or positive thinking, it's a mindset, and it's a perspective of looking at life. It really is. Second, you're going to look at the negative stuff that's going on in your life, or you're going to find something positive and focus on that instead. That's why I say turn it over to the Lord and ask Him to convict you when you're being negative, because most other people aren't going to speak up and tell you. So it's got to be something most often between you and the Lord. And so, yeah, things are going to happen that are bad in our lives. There's going to be a line at the grocery store, or the checkout person at Walmart is going to be kind of slow, or this or that, you know. You get backed up, it's taking longer than I planned, to be late for an appointment. And you can be negative, and you can complain, and you can just ruin everybody's day if you want to. But instead, choose a different mindset. And say, these things happen in life. There are delays, and sometimes things don't go as planned. And say, I'm just going to look at the positive. God's given me health, and He's given me the ability to get around, and look at the good things that are going on in your life, and you have to choose to find the positive in various situations. It's really up to you. It's up to you. What are you going to do? Are you going to focus on the negative, or are you going to find the positive in every situation and focus on that? Now, I know it's easy to find the negative. Easy to do. We can all do that. But listen, it'll make you miserable. It'll ruin your life. People won't want to be around you. You don't want that, especially as a child of God. It doesn't honor the Lord. And so choose. Even if it's not your natural instinct, even if you're by nature just a negative person, say, God, I want to beat this. And then, like I said, next week we'll talk more about it. The value of having a positive attitude, it's a choice. It really is a choice. Chuck Swindoll wrote about 2 paragraphs in a book he wrote years ago, back in the 80s. And I may share it next week, I'm not sure. But it's about attitude. And the whole thing is about how it's a choice. It comes down to a choice. It's not what you're born with. It's not what happens to you in life. It's a choice. You can choose to be positive, or you can choose to be negative. And I want to encourage you, plead with you to be a positive person. You'll have more friends. You'll have a better marriage. Your kids will be happier with you. Your parents will be happier with you. Your teachers will be happier with you. Whatever you do, you'll have better relationships. I hesitate to guarantee anything, but I pretty much guarantee that. Let's stand together as we pray. Heavenly Father, Lord,